Alright, this video will talk about the syntactic structure of scope ambiguous sentences along with our new fragment of English F2. So let's see what we can do in our new fragment of English that we couldn't do in our old fragment. Well, the first nice thing is that we now have NPs. We don't just have SNs. So we can now do an SNP VP sentence. We have S conjunction S and negation of S as normal. Our verb phrase stays the same. We have intransitive verbs and transitive verbs with NPs. So now we can do a VT and an NP. Our NPs, because we have more than one type of noun that we can work with, we can't just use proper names anymore. We can do different types of noun phrases. So for instance, we can do a noun phrase that breaks up into a determiner and a common noun. So NC is for common noun. These are words like farmer, basically anything that would have a predicate representation. We have NPs where we have N just going down to a proper noun. So these are proper nouns. I subscript it with just a P for proper noun. And we also have the case where we can do N to an N pro. So these are our pronouns. So he, she, it, they, us, we, and so on. So we can do that. We have specific determiners that we can use. So some, every, really any quantified noun we can use as a determiner. So the, many, most, and so on. Obviously, we can only talk about the ones that we've learned. And then we have some examples of other words that would work. So proper names can be proper names, common nouns are common nouns. Pronouns do have an index, though. So pronouns will have some number or some letter that index them so that we know what they are, just like with our assignment functions that we saw. So for instance, if we say she3, we can take a look in our assignment functions and we can see exactly what 3 is mapping to. Oh, in this case, I don't know, she3 is Mary, so we know at the end of our derivation that she would be Mary. And the rest are defined as they were for F1. Now, what's new is this rule for quantifier raising. So what this says is that if we have a noun phrase in a sentence, and this is just context, so whatever X and Y is, they can be empty, they can be there, and this is a quantified noun phrase, we can pull it out. So we can pull it out, we can create a new sentence node above it, and we give it an index. So this is exactly what we saw before with the scope ambiguity lecture. So I'll just do one quick line here. If we have like an S, an NP, and a VP, we can create a new S node. We can take this NP, we can move it up, and we can leave a trace in its place and co-index it with it. So that's what that quantifier raising rule looks like. Okay, let's just see some examples of how to do sentences, and that'll be the end of the video. So let's say we have a sentence, Sam saw a movie. Well, I have the predicate logic translation here because I think it's important to contrast it with the sentence. So first we start off with the sentence, Sam saw a movie. So this NP would have come down to a determiner, which is and then a common noun, which would be movie. So that would happen. And we just end up with this structure. So Sam saw a movie. This would be our simple structure. But then we would need to do quantifier raising on the quantified noun phrase, a movie. So we create this new node, which we'll call S2, and we simply move it up into this position here. So we move it into the subject, and that leaves us with a movie, and we give this an index 1. We leave a trace 1 under the old noun phrase so we know where it came from. And our final word order for this sentence in logical form would be a movie, Sam saw T1, and T1 references a movie. Now, if we take a look at our predicate logic translation, we see this is very similar. So, exists an X, movie X, and then for Sam saw T1, well, T1 is the same thing as X because it indexes noun phrase 1. We have our predicate saw, and then our subject here, of course, is Sam, and then movie is our object. And that movie corresponds to X. So actually, the translation for predicate logic matches our syntactic trees exactly at this point, which is a major hint as to how we build our rules and to how we do binding. That there's a very strong relationship between predicate logic and our trees in logical form that if you ignore, if you ignore that relation, it's sometimes difficult to understand why we do the things that we do, but everything here is motivated by the real world and predicate logic, and of course our syntactic structures and how we build things through constituents. So let's do some practice tree drawing, and that'll be the end of it for this week. A very short week. So Kate read every novel. Okay, so we can start off with a structure for Kate. So Kate is a proper name, so I call this an n little p. I put Kate's name here. Read, this is a transitive verb. And then every novel, this is a noun phrase consisting of a determiner and a common noun. I need to move this up a little bit. So the determiner here is every, this is our quantifier, and our common noun is novel. Okay, so we have our base sentence written. Now we need to do some movement to get into logical form. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a new sentence level with an NP host, so our NP will fit there. And now we're going to do some movement. So let's do movement. Let's take our quantified noun phrase and let's just move it up into this position. Okay, and now we have our NP here left over. We still need to co-index them so we know that they're related. So I'm going to say this is NP1, and I'm going to leave a trace 1 in that position, and there we have our sentence in logical form. So now we could do compositional semantics on this sentence, and that's what we'll focus on 2 weeks from now, because you have a test next week. Okay, so that's every novel Kate read T1. And let me show you the predicate logic translation for this sentence, just so it's very clear how these are related. For all x, if x is a novel, then, well, Kate read it. So read Kate X. So for every novel, Kate read that novel. Matches our predicate logic translation perfectly. Okay, let's now focus on this ambiguous sentence. Some person saw every performance. It would be very nice if I could just get rid of the tree in the middle to do this, but unfortunately, you know what? Let's see if I can do this. I'll make a new page, and then I'll just take a screenshot of the question. I'll go to the next page and I'll paste the question, and now I got space for the entire tree. This is phenomenal. This is too many weeks into the course to learn that I can do this on the fly. However, better now than never. Okay, so some person saw every performance. Let's start with the base tree for this, because it's going to be very similar. So we have a noun phrase, which is some person. So this will be a determiner and a common noun. So determiner is going to be some. The common noun is going to be person. The verb phrase will break into a transitive verb, which will be saw. And then we have a noun phrase, every performance. So this will be another determiner, another common noun, where the determiner is every, and the common noun is performance. Okay, this is scope ambiguous, which means there will be 2 different interpretations of this sentence. Can I? Yes, I can. Okay, so we'll have one interpretation and we'll have a second interpretation here, and hopefully we can fit both of them on the screen. Okay. So I'm not going to pick which interpretation we just do first. I'm just going to move things in different orders and we'll find out what interpretation we get. Okay, I got 2 quantified noun phrases, some person, every performance. So I'm going to create a new sentence node, and it's going to be an NP here. So I'm going to move the subject up first. Why not? Okay, so here's the subject. I am moving it up into this position, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a trace. So I'm going to say this is T1, and I'm going to index this noun phrase with 1, because that's where that noun phrase came from. So first I move the subject up. Now I have another quantified noun phrase, so I have to move all the quantified noun phrases up. So I'm going to build a new sentence node. It's going to have a spot for a noun phrase. So I can take the direct object here, I can move it up into the position of this noun phrase. It is going to overlap with some of the text that I have. So let me put it back for a second and create a little bit more room. So actually I'm going to get rid of that completely. Move everything over. Give ourselves a little bit more space. Okay, so now we can take this quantified noun phrase, we can move it up into this position. Okay, it's been moved. So we give this a different index, np2, and we leave a trace where it was with the same index so we know where it came from. So our final translation here is every performance, some person, T1 saw T2. So this is the reading where we have for all x, and then we have exists a y. So this is our first interpretation. Now, the second interpretation is very similar, except instead of moving some person to the lower position and every performance to the higher position, we simply switch the two. So I want to illustrate it with the movement again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these back into their places. So some person goes there, every performance goes there. This is how we start it. We don't have any indexes, but now how do we move it? So at this point, we want to use the interpretation where the existential is above. So first what we're going to do is we're going to move the direct object into this position here, but it's not going to fit because performance is a long word. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to every perf to shorten it up. And we can move this direct object into this position with the noun phrase. Okay, so now we give it an index. Doesn't matter which index we give it as long as it is the same as where it came from. So every performance moved up. And now we have one more quantified noun phrase to move, which is some person. So we're going to take this, some person, and we're going to move it up to this noun phrase up here. And we give it an index so that way we know where it came from and what it corresponds to. So now this interpretation is the exists a y such that for all x interpretation because some person scopes over the entire tree. So we saw two different trees there. And again, the indexes, we could have changed them around, so there's no reason this has to be 2, 1. We could switch these, no problem. So some person saw every performance. We could call this T2, and we could do some person as T1. That would be fine as well, as long as they're consistent. They just have to match where they came from, and that's all that has to be done in that case. So yeah, that's it for this week. Not much to do. Prepare for the test next week. The reason we're not doing more is because the next set of slides is how to do new rules for F2, and I don't want to give you new rules for F2 when you have a test on F1 next week because things might get a little bit confused. So we'll talk about all the new semantic rules the week after. So good luck studying, and if you have any questions, as always, email discussion board. I'll get you there.